We're still on Rumble, X, and
Okay,
Twitch.
I'm sorry. Everybody's on YouTube commenting. I was like, no, we're halfway through a story. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, you're so good. But actually, you know what? Why don't we come back to the whole team? Because it's a really long story and we'll figure out what's going on behind the scenes. We've got a few different issues. I think I invited too many friends to the party, guys. Let's give our team a chance to catch up with the cameras. And while they do that, sorry, Jason, I decided to fill up the studio. While they do that, we'll figure out also why we're not live on YouTube, but hopefully you guys are tuned in on X and Rumble. The new legislation will stipulate that THC refers to the total content of cannabinoids in all forms, including Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10, THCA, and HHC, for example. So that's a little bit of a conflict because I thought they said that they were going to ban them. I'll have to double check what this specifically means. You can't ban and then also regulate. Additionally, the heads of the USDA, FDA, and Justice Department and Alcohol, Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau would be required to work together to create a report with recommendations on regulating the sale of beverages containing THC. The legislation also provides for mandatory recalls of any hemp cannabinoid products that the FDA determines to be unsafe. Thoughts, guys? We're at a 5 milligram now.
I can always appreciate chances to try to regulate something responsibly rather than just kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater. So I believe that that's sort of the overall tone of what we're talking about here. Some interesting approaches, but overall, it seems like, and it reinforces the idea that when you hear about regulations being proposed or some normalcy being given to cannabis, 80% of the ideas, no matter what territory you're in or talking about, tends to be the same. So I guess I'm the outsider here today, right? California. But what you mentioned seems very reminiscent of the types of regulations I'm used to.
I'm going to stick with the same thing that I said during the Texas Ledge. I don't think that we should have milligram per packaging. Sizes need to be determined by the user. So if we had something like, you could still have the same product at whatever milligram dosage it is, but being able to actually microdose that down to whatever was needed, and what a recommended serving dose would be. I just don't think that capping it at a package does anything to benefit anybody.
100%
Agreed.
agree. 100% agree. I mean, it's just it's on one hand totally happy. We're thinking, you know, let's regulate and not just ban it. But on the other hand, I mean, make your choices wisely. The more restrictions you put on it, the more you're just going to help the illicit market. We've just seen that time and time again. History repeats itself. So we'll see.
Yeah, I also have some concerns about this creating a de facto tolerance tax. I don't think people always look at it from that perspective, but honestly, anything 5 milligrams is not enticing, or I really don't want it as a consumer or a patient. They say that, and also I've seen a couple recent studies that say at 5 milligrams effects are not really noticeable at all. So I'm a little bit worried about those of us who have a bit of a higher tolerance I don't want to purchase a whole bulk supply of gummies just to get a certain ratio of cannabinoids. And manufacturers should be allowed to to produce products that meet consumer demands safely and higher doses. Why would it be safe for medical, but not safe for medical consumption, but not safe for general consumption? Help it make sense. Because it, like, I get if we're saying because physicians are supervising, but we are all very much aware that the physicians through most of these programs, you pay to have an appointment with a physician. They write you a prescription, whatever recommendation, you go into a system, you never end up seeing that physician again. You never have to see him again. So I don't want to hear doctor-patient relationship nonsense, because I know that is not what's actually being executed. What's actually being executed is a bunch of operators working as adult use operators, distributing products to adult consumers that are the same products as what we would otherwise have in the market without such caps. I get that they're trying to bring it to a middle ground, but we saw in Texas, that's just no way to win. And we're not talking about being extremists. We're just talking about common sense. Liz?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you guys hear me? Are we good?
Yes, we are
Thanks.
good. We're good. And we've got all the cameras.
It's been a minute. It's been a minute since I've been on high at 9, and I'm already high, But I always go back to whenever I see these, proposed regulations or hear about, some solution to not completely kill the hemp industry. My question always goes back to what are they trying to protect, or what is the motive at the end of the day? And I think that there are many, many competing priorities. And so whenever I hear, oh, well, what about this, this, and this? I mean, it's just like a formula. What formula is going to work? What will our lawmakers agree on? What will they be, what will Texans agree on? What do Texans want? It's really, really chaotic. And so when I think about the nation, I really think about Texas and how Texans have done it. And I think milligram caps, I think it's arbitrary. Everything you guys are saying is like, yep, yep, yep. And I really don't know that we have clearly identified the motives, right? Who are we protecting? And we all know who we're protecting. We're protecting big cannabis. So that's my, talk track there.
Big cannabis, big alcohol, big everything, man. I hate the way it just seems like from legalizing cannabis to then the farm bill going through and legalizing hemp, they've been pit against each other from the beginning, and it shouldn't be that way, obviously. And then now, even more than that, we even have people within the hemp industry. It's cannibalizing the hemp industry. And different segments are fighting each other, and it's like we're stronger as one. People stick together. We're stronger as one.
Sean,
and all of these. And I just wanted to mention, every time they propose to change something, we're distracted, and we're focused on this, crumb versus the plant, the entire industry. So.
Sean, can I dissect something that you mentioned a little while ago, just simply with regards to milligram caps? Because even here in a different area, we see 10 milligram caps, and I'm not defending that. I do like the ability to be able to have a batch tested and be able to determine exactly what the dosage within that batch is. But I see all sorts of, you call it creative loopholes, that even gets around what you have here on the West Coast, which is generally a 10 milligram per serving, 10 milligram maximum per container, unless you find a way to have a tincture or like a syrup that could be classified as technically a concentrate, in which case it can go up to 500 or even up to 1,000 milligrams. The idea being, in these latter examples, that there are loopholes that end up being exploited that go outside of something that's even meant to be capped fairly low, like 10 milligrams, to your point about 5 milligrams being a little ineffectual. 10 milligrams for most, also fairly ineffectual. In fact, I would like to make the same sort of example where, if I'm in a fair amount of pain, I can take down 100 milligrams without real issue. And then, that helps, and I can move forward with a productive day. And so in that kind of sense, even then, even though we're projecting and it's a different proportion, I still don't want a face full of gummies or whatever else that now needs to be a part of my diet and that part of my day in order to help me function. That's equally ridiculous. And so this is what I direct back to you. Is there a milligram max? Let's go, just because we're seeing it now in two different areas, and we can agree that the goalposts of 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams per serving can be fairly ineffectual, to your previous point. Should there be milligram maximums? Should there? I agree for testing it. I don't really know the answer to this kind of thing either. I'm not really leading into another point. Should there be milligram maximums, or does it just need to be communicated well? Or should somebody be able to put themselves down with a for a week if they need to. Because just to put this out there, if we're correctly regulating stuff, there's not many syrups or tinctures out there on the market that are true things like 1,000 milligrams. Even the brownies or various types of edibles that I've seen in the market that I've personally, tested, chemically tested, and find out that something that's marked, the worst example ever was something that was marked at 1,000 milligrams, actually tested at 11 milligrams. Can you imagine the dopes that took that batch down like 1,000 milligrams and took it down and then went and bragged to all their friends that, hey, I can take down 1,000 milligrams and go out for the evening? Like, no, fool, you can't. 1,000 milligrams would be destructive to any human being, myself included. So I've talked for long enough. What do you guys think about like the whole idea of a max, let alone that it should be properly labeled and discussed? But should there be a max?
It's got to be properly labeled. It's got to be properly labeled. With Liz, no. And we argued all legislature, no max. And here's how we got there.
No max.
Every time we create a limit, you create a new opportunity for folks to break your rule. So why do that to yourself? I think one thing we forget is that legislators need to remember that the sole pressure of the law does not exist solely on the legislature, that we still have a judiciary. And one thing I thought it was funny, Charles Perry mentioned, this should be the biggest private lawsuit in Texas. And I think he's right. I think he's right. If your products are mislabeled, if the state doesn't have a standard. So we need the states to come up with standards. But when it comes to milligram rules, one, it creates a tolerance tax. So that's a huge issue. And then two, folks are going to break those rules. They're going to skirt them anyway, or they're going to come up with something else more ridiculous. And three, to your point, I can eat a 50 milligram gummy and be completely normal. I can chew on a few of them all day. Edibles, some people not affected at all by edibles. And then when we start doing things like milligram caps, we create this or cannabinoid restrictions. Like they're saying nothing derived from hemp. What does that do when we're talking about CBN coming from THC? It's oxidized and aged. There are some cannabinoids that I think we can safely get to. I don't want your polysaturated fat cannabinoids. Like I'm not into the hydrogenated, we've gone so far away from the original. But I do think they should be really careful about limiting science innovation before they fully understand it. And when we're writing regulations, we got 10 mgs here in Texas as a standard serving. And then we made offerings for education on a 5 milligram micro serving and a 25 extra strength, just like your Excedrin in a bottle. You have your little bit, your regular migraine dose, and then your extra strength. We could do the same thing, but I do think to an extent, when you're talking about those 1,000 milligram ones, there's got to be at least some threshold where we know this is venturing into dangerous territory, maybe not so safe. But then again, isn't Marinol like 100%, 99% THC? Ineffective, but still, and are people dying from it? No. Pharmacists are using it. Pharmacists
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm just so eager to jump in here because, we are talking about something that is, a substance, a cannabinoid that is medically controlled here in Texas. Our doctors have the ability to write a prescription. Yes, it's called a prescription in Texas. We get yelled at all the time, but I promise you that's what it's called. If you have if you're in the teacup program, right? And so that's why I say no limits, soldier. Because we should be able to dose ourselves. Our doctors should be able to say, hey, you know what, Liz, I know this is crazy, but you need 300 milligrams tonight. If you want to, treat your pain with THC versus, a pill. So yeah, I don't believe in limits because, as Sean said, it creates that tolerance tax and people are just going to work around it anyway. Again, we're really focusing in on one little piece of it. And it's an all encompassing issue here. You know, it's a medicine that they're keeping from the people, and now they're justifying it because they read a study or somebody wrote a study about how 5 milligrams is the right amount of milligrams that should be in that bag, and then teens won't jump in front of trains. You know, that's the kind of conversation that's like being had here in Texas. And it's just like, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, let's back up. Also, not all milligrams are created equal. You know, I might take a gummy with, 10 milligrams of live rosin and just the most pure ingredients, and it just rocks my world. And then I might take a gummy with fucking 10 milligrams of distillate, and I feel kind of weird. You know what I mean? So it's all about, I think, transparency.
And it's just like flour. You can have a certain level of THC percentage, or so claimed, and it's ineffective. And then you can have some really, really nice, well-balanced, well-bodied, low THC flour that actually makes you feel more elevated than something purporting to be, 40% or whatever. But we do need to head into our next commercial break. So let's hop to it. Any final words before we do it? Nate, I want to give you the floor because you're in a room surrounded by Texans. But I know you had an awakening a few weeks ago. What are your thoughts?
All right, off mute. I'm looking out for more opportunities to learn about that now that I know that it's not the rule that if somebody has decided, within a state that doesn't have clear-cut recreational cannabis programs, that that any of those that are involved in hemp are playing 100% by the rules. But it was absolutely mind-blowing to me to learn that there are microcosms where there are people who are absolutely going out of their way, above and beyond, to not only simulate a strongly regulated, not simulate, there's my bias, to recreate a strongly regulated environment that essentially matches regulations that exist and are generally accepted from around the country, but also that these communities have gone a step farther and have been able to communicate that there's a difference between qualities of cannabis and well-regulated, well-grown stuff that are produced, that the producers are happy to represent what it is and where it came from, actually exists. And the fact that the community, rather than go for the cheaper, crappier, in my opinion, options, has actually clung on to these microcosms, these opportunities for communities to self-regulate, was just, again, mind-blowing. I didn't realize that existed. And just to learn about
Welcome
that.
to the party.
Yeah, fun, right? Just to realize that was something that actually existed, and I mean, it reinstills a little bit of faith kind of idea. I could go on and on about it, but any comments I'd make would sort of be cornered from there. So yeah, no, happy to explain that awakening right there, Sean. It was really interesting, and I continue to look for opportunities now that I know it exists to reinforce that these things do exist, and that my previous bias that it was just an all versus nothing, which is, when you're uninformed, I mean, it really is just two sides of a coin, and that's it. There is no gray area. Go figure. There was absolute exceptions to what I understood, and because of those exceptions and the communities that accepted those exceptions, you end up having these awesome areas of, like you suggested, there's this lounge life that now surrounds it that nobody else has, because you've created these niches within cannabis of people who actually care what they're consuming and enjoy, and you're actually attracting people who want to be of a more of a higher echelon of stoner, if you will. And love to hear any reflection on that. But commercials, right?
Yeah, we're going to go to commercial, but actually we are on YouTube. Yes, we missed you, fam. We don't know what delayed us going live on YouTube, but we're here. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything. We were just talking about how that 5 milligram cap on that bill that's being proposed as an alternative to the hemp ban is really not all that it's cracked up to be. When we come back from commercial break, we're going to actually get right back into it, because we've got a story coming out of Chicago about how their ban is apparently delayed. More to come. Let's go to commercial, though.
can't spin. Oh, sorry.
All right, and we are
Hey,
back. So
guys.
let's go. I'm gonna introduce you guys before we hop straight into the story from Chicago. We have a few different folks here. I surprised Nate and the entire High at 9 team. We weren't sure. Dale is out on travel. Jason is out on travel, and we were missing our whole crew. So I invited a whole bunch of my friends from Texas to come help take over Thursday. And Nate is just gets to be the guest in our little world, and I'm actually kind of really excited. I think we're going to spoil him a bit, show him what we're all about here in Texas. The first story, in case you missed it, we talked about the new bill being proposed as an alternative to the hemp ban from Senators Merkley and who else was it? I can't remember off the top of my head. There's just too many. Merkley, they're out of Oregon. The Democrats out of Oregon. Merkley, and we should have them memorized by now, you'd think. Wyden.
Sorry,
Merkley
Sean.
and Wyden. Hey, it's okay. You guys, hey, I had a TABC meeting going on this morning. We had all of our little technical difficulties. I am not going to remember the names right now. And no, sorry, but we should. They, because they're pretty frequently the guys who are actually pushing forward legislation. So they put forward a bill as an alternative to the hemp ban, but it does include a lot of caps, a 5 milligram cap for edibles, 10 milligram cap for beverages, some caps for packages. And the whole last segment, we talked about why that's really limiting for a market. Now we're going to hop over to Chicago, where City Hall is grappling with hemp-derived THC products, and they have a regulated market. So Nate, I think this is where you're going to feel a lot more comfortable in the conversation, because you're right. We did grow something really special in some of these select hemp markets, but in the spaces where we do have licensed regulated markets, how do we bring some calm and some order to the storm between hemp and marijuana, recognizing that we're all cannabis? Let's go to CBS News. Sarah Tenbaum is the writer of this story. A bid to ban the sale of intoxicating hemp-derived THC products in Chicago, except at licensed marijuana dispensaries, hit a roadblock on Wednesday before the full city council could vote on the proposal. Alderman Rosanna Rodriguez Sanchez and Alderman Byron Cijo Lopez, used parliamentary maneuver to delay what had been expected to be a final vote by the full city council. Their move means that the city council cannot vote on the proposal until its next meeting, which is expected to happen before the end of the month, so alder people can vote on a 2026 budget plan. The License and Consumer Protection Committee voted to move the proposed ban forward on December 3rd. It would ban the sale of hemp-derived THC products outside of marijuana dispensaries. Hemp-derived THC products include Delta 8, Delta 9, which are currently legal to sell outside of dispensaries due to what some call is a loophole in Illinois' industrial, try to say all those I's and L's. I'm struggling. Illinois' Industrial Hemp Act, which legalized and regulated hemp farming in 2018. Recreational marijuana was legalized in Illinois in 2020, but subject to different and stricter regulations. The Industrial Hemp Act, much like the Farm Bill, anticipated that the plant would be used to make industrial products like fiber and also used to produce CBD oils that are marketed as having a therapeutic but not intoxicating property. But hemp has increasingly been used to create synthetic products with intoxicating compounds that are not regulated, according to CBS News. Governor J.B. Pritzker has vocally opposed these intoxicating hemp products, saying that they undercut the state's legal marijuana industry and they put children and teens in harm's way. That's kind of funny because I had seen a lot of commentary on LinkedIn specifically about the use of children and putting children in harm's way, but what a false argument that is when they purport to be defending children and then capture the market. Just an interesting little whispers from the industry in Chicago on LinkedIn. While statewide legislation to either ban or regulate synthetics has stalled in Springfield, the Chicago ban has continued to move forward until now. Supporters say that products come in packaging that looks like candy or pop and are often sold to children. But dozens of business owners who oppose the ordinance say it could force their stores to close. Mayor Brandon Johnson opposes the ban. Instead, he wants to regulate hemp products by setting a minimum age of 21 to buy them, while also establishing labeling and testing standards for those products. Johnson has offered an alternative proposal that would tax hemp products to raise $10 million a year in revenue and prohibit the sale of products designed to look like cookies, candies, chips, or other snacks. The mayor dropped that plan from his 2026 budget after Congress approved a ban on hemp or CBD products with a THC content of greater than 0.4 milligrams starting in November 2026, however. So what do we do, guys? How do we bring it back to the whole team when we're looking at this problem? We have noticed a huge divide between hemp and marijuana, both being cannabis. I always am interested to see, it always feels a little bit like a narrow vision when dispensary owners, and I love a good dispensary, and I think there's definitely a time and a place to have an experience in a dispensary, but so many dispensaries aren't providing that. And for producers and consumers and distributors, an idea that should be considered is that hemp has created a level of accessibility that could never have been achieved going at this through the lens of marijuana. We all understand it's cannabis. Like, no one is pretending that they're not the same thing. The issue is the way that the states see this, wanting to tightly control it and kind of pinch it, white knuckling it really, and failing because you can't. This market has existed for thousands of years. When we bring in these hemp bans, I think you actually create a bigger problem for the cannabis industry at large. And one thing that I would hope marijuana operators might consider to try to bring some balance to this equation is some kind of legislation that allows for hemp operators to continue to exist, for cannabis products to be expanded beyond dispensary shelves. So that way we can have a level of normalization that won't pull people out of dispensaries. It'll actually create an experience of the dispensaries that do that curate an experience, versus limiting where consumers and producers can actually retail their products. This is why I don't understand this from the hemp side of it, because it just doesn't make sense as a business. Why would you want to keep yourself locked in a box? It doesn't make any sense. Somebody help me out here.
I can maybe add just a bit of perspective to this. Now, it's not something that I necessarily agree with, because I, in most cases, would want to be pretty, open about things and let people know they should do what they feel like. But at the same time, there is a level of regulation that I've begun to accept as necessary in the industry, because I do have sort of double vision about the whole hemp thing. On one hand, you've shown me that there are exceptions to what I considered to be the rule, which is an amazing thing and absolutely opened my eyes. On the other hand, the rule up until this point is that I've directly observed things that are unpassable in the California market, literally being shipped to other markets. Now, this creates a condition that needs to be said out loud, I feel like, to have everybody absorb and start from the same place, because I'll absolutely die on this hill. Is that when you create a condition where a certain market can be used as a dumping ground, it creates conditions where you have an unprecedented, unacceptable amount of toxins being dropped into a market where people don't know what they're taking. Now, again, you showed me that that's not the rule, in terms of ubiquitously throughout the market. But I do know that that still happens. And I can tell you, when you ask the question, why is this happening? It's because I can tell you that from the regulator's point of view and how they would defend this is, again, I'm not pro-regulator, but how they would defend this would be to say that there are people out there who are trying to circumvent the law. And these people specifically are who the laws are being made for. They don't make driving laws for not going 120 miles per hour for people who are fucking track stars who can, maintain that level of race carrery, but they do it for the common man. And the common man tries to circumvent in ways that they don't have the ability to control. And that would be a reason for regulation to exist. And in some of those ways, again, not the notion of people being regulated, but absolutely the notion of people knowing what they are consuming. And if they're consuming something that could be toxic, they absolutely should know. There's not one other product in the US that's accepted that would have that condition where this is acutely toxic, but you don't need to know about that. Like, we all know that's wrong. And that would be the issue. That would be the problem. The circumvention is meant to prevent, or the stopping the circumvention is meant to prevent that.
Yes, yes, I could not agree more. Whenever I hear, these, whenever I hear about regulation, my ears are open. I want to know. I'm a consumer first and foremost. I love lab tests. I love to know where my products come from. I love to know that my businesses are held to a certain standard, not over regulation, but, yeah. And I think it's a great sign, when the, industry is working to police itself, because you want to work out the bad actors. We need to. That's why a market like Texas hasn't had very much respect, because crap has been being dumped into our market for a long, long time, including crap coming from the southern border. Okay, Mexican ditchweed. No, thank you. But we've had a lot of that in Texas, and so again, not to just conflate everything to a Texas issue. But because it's a national thing and other states obviously are figuring out as well. But, I'm all about protecting the consumer and, transparency and all of these things, but not at the expense of the farmer, not at the expense of the small business, the manufacturer. I mean, there's a lot of ancillary businesses that get affected when regulation comes into play, and it's bad. I think we saw that happen in California, and we want to learn from that in Texas. And I think our nation could learn from that too. I mean, we're still working with Schedule 1 status, guys. So all of this conversation that we're having is really like in that shadow.
Yeah, Stone,
I yield my time.
I want to Stone, I want to ask a question, but I want to get your response just as a different consumer in this market. But to Liz's point, and point of frustration for me when we have this conversation, yes, I do agree the Texas market and our local producers are severely underrated because many people assume our entire market is built off of whatever is falling off the back of a truck from California. And while it is true that that is happening, it always amuses me that that's usually coming from operators in California. It says more about your industry than it does ours, because that's the product y'all are producing.
That was a mic drop right there.
But this is why I get a little bit spicy, because we have smaller regional producers, the things that we dream about having in these marijuana states. We have that in hemp states, and then we're so quick to sling mud. I want us to start to look at it, and I know I said that, and it's not very nice, but I do want California operators to realize we're trying to bring y'all out of a system that has historically kept you under still tightly prohibitive rules. You guys still have areas where you can't dispense at all. Our legislature on the Republican and the Democrat side wouldn't even consider allowing local rules to be made because they know what a clusterfuck that is when it comes to regulation. So there's different ways that I think we can pull back some of the conditions and restrictions that have been placed on marijuana through hemp. And we still need to elevate and folks, you got to get your fucking license. Like in Texas, when Charles Perry clapped back at us, when we said we have over 5,000 operators, and he said, really? Because only about 25,000 of y'all or 3,000 of you have licenses at $250 for a license. Come on, y'all, get the paperwork done. Follow the rules. And so I can see the frustration, because even, let's face it, whether you have very expensive licensing fees or even $250, some folks just aren't going to do their paperwork, and that's really frustrating. But Stone, you tell me, when you have regional products, how do you feel about how we stack up versus when you go out of state? And be honest, I know it's great stuff. That's not the question.
The best
is, do other people as well? And what's the problem?
Why are you putting me on? Why you put me on the spot here? I might not have good things.
Get in the high road.
There are several products, Texas products, that I enjoy, but it's going to be more in that edible and drink sector. For me, I'm a flower snob, and I hate to say I have not tasted anybody's flower that levels up to what I'm used to smoking. And I would love for you to show it to me. And, you know, maybe I just have a weird palate, but
Hold my beer.
I'm judging right now this Texas THC challenge flower thing. And I mean, I have a lot of full joints sitting around this ashtray right now. So I hate that you put me on the spot, but that's just where, please introduce me to somebody with some killer flower and change my mind, please.
Stone, let me introduce you to, I mean, year number 6, Texas Hemp Classic is happening in the springtime. You will, of course, be a judge, as you are. I always appreciate your candor. You know, I'll die on that hill. I love Texas weed, and I have the best, and I love my growers, and they give me the freshest and the best. So it might not be so fair, but it will be fair one day when we have access. And so I'm really excited about this year's contestants. I'm excited about what you're going to find coming from Texas that is now legal. You know, we are cannabinoid agnostic at the Texas Hemp Classic. It's all about the terps. So some, you know, we got THC kind of in all different directions. But our lab partner, SC Labs, is a very cool lab partner. So my point is this: you're going to smoke it. That's all I have to say. Yielding my time again. But I just want to say one last thing about Sean. Sean, I love what you said, and you said it in a beautiful, kind way, but really it says more about the California market dumping your shit into our backyard than it does about us. You know what I'm saying? But we're all just stating the obvious here, and in pursuit of a better industry that's nationwide, that's regional specific, that's right by the consumer. So, you know,
a lot of people will smoke not good flower, and a lot of people will drink drinks, and that's fine.
That part.
But you know, I'll take a low THC delicious flower over a high THC grass tasting joint. So
yes,
I won't smoke it at my age. I no longer smoke this. I'll pass on your joints there.
I think it's actually fair feedback, though, and I think it's something that every market has to come to terms with. Is there are a handful of producers who make really good products, and then most everyone else is mids, including in California. Like I give y'all respect, and I'm not gonna disparage as much. I give it respect. I've always given it respect. But it always drives me crazy when there couldn't possibly be anyone else good anywhere else, not in Michigan, not in Maine, not in Texas, not in New York, not in any of these other markets. It's only in California, and everybody else is getting your backdoor mids. Come on. California
has a lot of boof.
I know. That's why I'm like,
real quick, just to clarify, I didn't say backdoor mids. What I suggested was a dumping ground. There is some fantastic stuff that is fabulously contaminated, and you should never ever consume it. I don't want to conflate those two things. Those are two different things that meet quality conditions And I'm not saying stuff that doesn't meet a quality condition. No, that is not what it's about. In fact, there are subsectors of quality in this country, and I dream about the day where we can actually look at this on the spread of, say, the entire United States or beyond, and actually determine empirically what type of genetics and what expressions of those genetics grow best in what territories, and do it the same way that effing corn is done. There's no reason why we should be limiting things to certain areas. Why is garlic grown in Gilroy? Is it because everybody in Gilroy is like, y'all suck? Or is it because the whole world came together and said, that's the best place to grow garlic? That's how we should approach cannabis. And I dream for the day that we can mature as an industry and as a worldview to where people are actually accepting our industry like that. What I am telling you is that I am also in cannabis testing. And from the cannabis testing perspective, I have visually witnessed things that the three unwise men of failures, we're talking about pesticides, microbial, and depending on whether or not it's a concentrate, concentrates may fail for residual solvents, and flowers may fail for heavy metals, where that's a condition that's left behind most of the time with regards to most extracts. Moving along, things that won't pass are able to be tested pre-compliance in our industry. And I have witnessed the idea that if something passes the conditions of compliance testing, it will be sold into a more direct avenue that's more readily available for being able to see some, revenue generation versus trucked out of state through one means or another. That because it won't pass in California, this now becomes the secondary means of being able to dump the unpassable cannabis. This happens. I mean, I don't want to, and this is the reason I jumped to it so quickly. This is not a quality concern. This is everybody should have, at least in my opinion, a level of regulation to what they're smoking, because except for small pockets of the industry, people will take advantage and go for the path of least resistance, which you mentioned one way through the idea of licensing. But in another way, I can't remember if it was you, Sean, sorry, but it was mentioned one way in the direction of licensing. And in another way, I'll suggest that if you don't require people to chop down an otherwise possibly profitable batch, but now you have to throw $2,000 of testing because you grew hundreds and hundreds of pounds of the same thing. And to ethically do that, that's the proper way to go. Or you might just suggest that somebody needs to get paid in that $2,000 of testing, and maybe one test is enough. I'm not saying people and best friends that you've had who've taken the ethical route do that. I'm saying the rest of the country, by and at large, will take this opportunity, and they will, and I fucking hate to go doomsday like this, but they'll straight up poison people. They'll poison our community for the sake of being able to make a buck and justify to themselves that they don't have to go to this degree. And so I say again, it's not a quality issue. This is when you give people the opportunity to have a flushing ground, they take it. And now you count on the ethics of the operators, like you've mentioned, exists to me. And again, that was the punch. I didn't think that existed, right? That's the exception. But the rule, and at least we can argue that 50% of people out there absolutely take advantage of cannabis consumers and absolutely use these taken advantage of people to tell them that they're getting the best deal ever and they're the smartest consumer ever, and feed them straight up effing poison that you would not give to yourself, your kids, or your grandmother.
I totally agree with you. And on that note, Stone's actually going to bring us back to Texas, because we do agree there are some basic guidelines and principles that we need to have in place on the federal level, guiding the state level, and then let states make their decision. Stone, bring us home to Texas, where TABC at this moment is having a meeting. I'm going to cut intros short because we are just having such an in-depth conversation. We're going to need to run through the rest of our stories. We're only on story 2 now. Stone, take it away.
All right. Thanks for watching. Goodbye. No, I'm just kidding. It's almost noon. It was a joke. Sorry. Anyway, High at 11. Here we go. This morning, the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission kicked off a public hearing that will reshape the hemp-derived THC market across the state. And if you're wondering why the folks who regulate margaritas are suddenly weighing in on your THCA pre-roll or your favorite Delta 8 drink, you're not the only one asking. The hearing started about 2 hours ago, and TABC is taking comments on new permanent rules governing the sale of hemp-derived THC products. These rules directly affect bars, dispensaries, smoke shops, and any business offering THC in a place that also serves alcohol. For better or worse, the future of the Texas hemp industry is being discussed right now. But before we get to what's happening today, let's back up and answer the question no one seems to agree on, and that is THC even legal in Texas? The short answer, yes, certain forms of it. We all know Texas legalized hemp in 2019 under House Bill 1325, following the federal definition of cannabis containing 0.3 delta-9 THC or less by dry weight. That single decimal point opened the door to a massive industry selling CBD pre-rolls, THC flower, delta 8 and 9 gummies and drinks, basically every cannabinoid alphabet soup product that you see at a gas station. Since then, the Texas Department of State Health Services has regulated those consumable hemp products, while TABC only oversaw them when sold in alcohol licensed venues. That arrangement held together barely until this year. As we've reported, Texas tried to ban these products, then didn't. We reported that earlier this year. Doofus Dan Patrick pushed Senate Bill 3, which would have outlawed nearly every hemp-derived THC product in Texas. Delta 9 gone, THCA gone, low-dose drinks all gone. The bill passed legislation, and then Governor Abbott vetoed it, surprising just about everyone. Heather Fazio from the Texans for Responsible Marijuana Policy summed it up nicely. She said, "We're better off with regulation than prohibition." Abbott agreed, kind of. Right after the veto, he issued an executive order directing agencies to tighten the rules around potency, packaging, testing, and especially sales to minors. That executive order is the reason we're watching the TABC hearing, hold a hearing today. Now, what today's hearing is actually about: a few months back, TABC, DSHS rolled out emergency rules that finally did something Texas should have done from the beginning. They restricted hemp-derived THC sales to adults 21 and up. Retailers like Shada Tarabi of Restart CBD, thank you so much, have been calling for this for a long time. She said, "We've been advocating for 21 up age gating. These rules help operators who are already doing things the right way." Today, TABC is taking public comment on making those emergency rules permanent. Texans who didn't log on this morning can still submit written input through January 4th by emailing rules@tabc.texas.gov, but the age restriction piece is only Act 1. Now, why is TABC in charge at all? This is where things get a little interesting. Abbott's executive order doesn't just ask for tighter rules. It also instructs state agencies to begin transferring all enforcement of THC sales to TABC. Right now, TABC only regulates restaurants and bars. DSHS, I'm having trouble with that, regulates retail shops and dispensaries, but soon TABC will regulate everything. Once that transfer happens, expect a flood of additional rules around testing, labeling, product safety, and more. Today's hearing is simply the first step in that shift. Meanwhile, as we know, federal law is about to blow up the market anyway. We've reported extensively on the federal changes Congress quietly passed. Dirty Mitch sticking that in the bill. Anyway, changes in redefine hemp to include total THC, limit of allowable THC per product, and ban most semi-synthetic cannabinoids. If you're thinking that eliminates nearly the entire current market of hemp-derived THC beverages, vapes, THCA, flowers, tinctures, and gummies, you're absolutely right. As Shada put it, that 48 to 72 hours was definitely jarring. So unless Congress revisits the issue, the booming hemp market, both nationally and here in Texas, faces a massive contraction in 2026. So where does that leave Texans today? Here's the reality of this morning. The TABC hearing is underway right now, focusing on 21 plus age rules. Retailers largely support this and most have been reporting enforcing it since day one. This is the start of a much bigger regulatory handoff to TABC. Today's rules won't be the last. Texans still have a chance to influence policy through January 4th. Public comment matters. SB3 proved that. Email your comments to rules@tabc.texas.gov. Federal law will soon impose even stricter limits. Unless fixed, most hemp-derived THC products could disappear in 2026. Your lawmakers need to hear from you. For now, hemp-derived THC is still legal in Texas. The industry continues operating under emergency rules and a federal clock ticking. I'm Stone Slater with the High 9 News. What do you guys think?
Okay, so for today, I just want to reiterate the TABC rules, just 21 age gate for TABC licensees. And they actually relaxed, what you're commenting on for this one is they relaxed the one strike policy. That's what they changed in the last meeting. I had the pleasure of just being in the meeting last time. I was listening to the DPS meeting this morning. I think all they're going to announce are teacup licensees, but we'll update you guys on that tomorrow because there was really nothing in their agenda about teacup or hemp. So anything that they do discuss in that DPS meeting hasn't formally been announced. They may announce the teacup licensees. I don't think they're looking for much of. Actually, I would encourage you to comment on that. If you have ever experienced a product from any of these licensees in another state, or you have any kind of knowledge of how great they are in other states, please feel free to reach out to DPS and let them know your thoughts and insights on those various MSOs. We're not going to go into mudslinging on this episode because we're just so short on time. But Chastity, I have a few questions for you because you're running for office out in the panhandle of Texas. I'm curious we've got products launching in the Toot and Totems out there. We've got products launching in the Restarts and the Fuel Stops, hopefully in the Buckies. Some really good products even from organizations like American Hemp Company, American Weed Co. Kind of incredible, guys. We've got a lot of good stuff out here. So my question for you, Chastity, is you know the Texas Panhandle and Charles Perry's territory so well. And you know the people out there in Amarillo really well. You've got your pulse on the community. In these more rural spaces of America, what do you think the people actually want? Do they want to go to a large medical dispensary? Do they want fast access? Like, what are you reading from the ground on both sides? Like, for consumers, because for those of y'all who don't know, Chastity is a former dispensary owner as well. So for consumers, what are they thinking? And then for prohibitionists, what are they actually worried about and where can we hedge that off? Not the standard, gonna kill all of our kids nonsense. What are they actually worried about?
Power. Everything that every political leader is after is power. What can we, who can we control? How can we control it? And how can we make money off of that control? That's essentially the bottom line of all politics, right? And I mean, where I live in North Texas, rurally, those farmers are driving around baling hay or whatever they're doing all day long, and they're getting high. You know what I mean? It's whether they're getting it from a plug or they're getting it from a hemp dispensary, they're still doing it. It's just not something that you talk about. It's just not something that everybody is out publicly doing all of the time. We have just as many stores as you guys have, and they're successful stores. Why are they successful? Because people are using it, right? People are buying it. I think when we're talking about what we see in the prohibitionist space, I think this is national in my personal opinion, is that hemp is the only free market that we have left. If we're talking about actual free markets, hemp is the only free market that we have left. The government doesn't have their hands. Corporations have not completely taken over the hemp industry yet. And we have no bills or laws that are formulated for them to do that, formulated to make it so that they can take that over. And that's why hemp is the only free market left. That's what we're fighting over here. We're fighting over our right to have free markets versus their right to control absolutely everything. That's what this is completely and totally about. Period. End of story. This isn't about safety. This isn't about kids. This isn't about anything else other than control, in my personal opinion. So I think in North Texas, what we see is the same thing that you guys see in South Texas. It's just, it's a little bit more I think we're a lot more rural, even in our cities, than you guys are in the bigger cities, like in Austin, San Antonio, Houston, things like that. And we're a lot more liberty minded. And so it's not as much that there are people like me that will fight for it, but most of the time it's come and take it, and you're not coming and taking it. So I'm just going to kind of ignore it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I love
Yes.
that. And on that, I think actually we're gonna leave it on that note, because we got to get into our next stories. And I don't think anyone could say it any better. So let's go into our next commercial break. Thank you so much for joining us, Chastity, and remind us what you're running for again before we cut to commercial.
I'm running for U.S. Congress in District 13. So I will be on the ballot, the primary ballot, and hopefully the general ballot if I can pass my primaries. I'm running against Ronnie Jackson. So and on the Republican ticket. So in the primaries, you can only vote Republican, you can only vote Democrat. So get to that Republican ticket, vote for me.
All right, Chastity there with a come and take it message when it comes to Texas hemp. Let's break to our next commercial.
The control tower from Highly Educated has perfected the dab. Utilizing the concept of thin film evaporation, you can waste none of it and taste all of it. The micro texture of the SE pillar increases nucleation at elevated temperatures. And with the tower propelling at 2,600 RPMs, it's certainly the most efficient dab experience to date. The control tower from Highly Educated.
I would love to go there with this group of people. But yeah, let's talk about.
Let's do it. Liz wants to go there with this group of people. Welcome back, Liz.
Hey.
Give us your final thoughts on what Chastity had to say about come and taking Texas hemp.
Yeah, come and take a Texas hemp. So I love everything that Chastity said. Everybody go out and vote for her, period, full stop, end of story. And, I think we need to consider that every legal market is still operating in opposition with the federal government. That is, cannabis is still a Schedule I drug, okay? So nobody is breathing fresh air, if you know what I'm saying, in this industry. And so if the federal government should move forward on the hemp ban, cool, let them do what they do, but let states do what states do. Texas is a very states, we are focused on what's best for Texans. We don't really give a flying hoot nanny what the federal government has to say, because how are they helping us? They left our borders open for the last 8 years, and we have to clean up the mess. Like, full stop. Texans, I feel like real Texans who do go and vote, they don't necessarily respect the federal government all that much. Ninth largest GDP on the globe, right? So I want to hear from you guys. Do you think Texans would evoke our states' rights when it comes to hemp? And I don't know.
What do you guys, here's a little evil thought that jumped in my head. Because we discussed before, like with the legalization of cannabis or marijuana, like the federal government would take a big hit by losing out on 280E. Do you think there's any evilness up there that's thinking we need to put that shit back, put that toothpaste back in the jar or whatever, so we can start charging these hemp retailers this 280E tax, because look at all this money that they're making that we're missing out on. Is that a possibility? Do you think that's an evil thing to think about?
I always think it's a possibility when people are like, ooh, let's claw back some more money. Because that's literally what's happening. Like, it's not that deep. They want all the money, they want all the control, they want all the power. And what we have with hemp in Texas is the last free market, as Chastity said. And it's all of our last free markets. If you're an American, I had some great conversations at MJ Biz last weekend in Vegas about Texas. And people are finally opening their eyes to what is at stake, right? And it can be all of our markets. You can come in here, and if you have a great product and you run a great company and you employ Texans, I think that's awesome. You'll be able to take advantage of the amazing tax breaks that we have as small businesses in Texas. When we are big, the bigger we are, the harder we fall. The hemp-derived cannabinoid market made $10.8 billion in 2025. The hemp-derived cannabinoid market. I'm not saying all those cannabinoids were good. I'm just saying, and it's not all just the nug. Obviously, it's ancillary, but that's a big number. $267 million in 2025 was made from taxes. From the hemp-derived cannabinoid market. Take that away. Come and take it. That's a big hole.
So to Stone's question, and then I do want to get into Nate's story.
Sorry.
But I don't think that they're the 280E. I think 280E was something for a while, but I don't think that I think they are very much aware that having more operators and taxing them more, or having a specific limited number of operators in a pharmaceutical space is going to be worth a lot more money, because it's a formula they've already used before. So yes, there's some evilness out there, but I don't think that's the money pot that they're looking to capture. With that, we got another story that's sure to get you guys fired up. As ER physicians are, oh no, we lost Chastity again. The internet connection out there is not as great, but
Panhandle.
The panhandle. This story's going to get a few of you all fired up, I'm sure, especially in the comments. ER physicians are formally naming and tracking a cannabis-linked condition, putting more patients in the ER with severe bouts of vomiting. For this story, let's go to Nate Wincourt, the founder of Teaching Bud, an educational cannabis program connecting the dots between emerging research, real-world data, and cannabis industry insights. Nate, take it away.
Appreciate that warm intro. Hey, everybody. How are you doing? This is Nate Winokur. Appreciate you jumping into this. This is something I've only sort of come across in passing, and it's the first article I've actually written on the subject. So it's something I'm still fairly fresh to, but also, of course, like so many of us have, our own internal kind of inner dialogues going on with how we would approach these types of ideas. So as Sean mentioned, ER doctors are sounding the alarm on a fast-growing cannabis illness, according to Science Tech Daily. It's saying hospitals are seeing a striking rise in people with sudden bouts of intense vomiting linked to long-term cannabis use, a condition now formally classified as cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. With the new medical code, doctors and researchers can better track how often it occurs and how it develops. Many patients are surprised to learn cannabis may be triggering their symptoms, especially since it's commonly used to ease nausea. Over the past 10 years, emergency departments have treated a growing number of people seeking help for abdominal pain accompanied by severe or persistent vomiting. Bear with me. A shared characteristic among many of these patients is long-term cannabis use. Clinicians only recently gained a standardized way to document this issue. Last month, a diagnostic code for cannabis hyperemesis syndrome became available, describing a gastrointestinal condition that begins within 24 hours of the most recent use and can continue for several days. People who develop the syndrome often face 3 or 4 bouts of symptoms each year. On October 1st, the WHO added the new code to its International Classification of Diseases Manual. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention also incorporated the update for U.S. healthcare providers. The change offers several practical benefits. With a single specific billing code, clinicians no longer need to rely on multiple less accurate codes to describe the condition. The new entry also allows providers to recognize repeat episodes more easily by checking a patient's medical records. For researchers, the update is especially valuable. It provides a clearer picture of how often the condition appears and who is most affected, helping investigators such as Beatrice Carlini track trends that were previously hard to pinpoint. Quote, "It helps us count and monitor these cases," end quote, said Carlini, a research associate professor at the University of Washington School of Medicine, who studies adverse health effects of cannabis use. Quote, in studying addiction and other public health concerns, we have three sources of data: what clinicians tell us, what people in the communities tell us, and what health records tell us. A new code for cannabis hyperemesis syndrome will support important hard evidence on cannabis adverse events, which physicians tell us is a growing problem, end quote. Although cases are increasing, many clinicians remain unfamiliar with the new syndrome because it is still relatively new in medical practice. Quote, a person often will have multiple emergency department visits until it is correctly recognized, costing thousands of dollars each time, Carlini said. Even with a proper diagnosis, patients are sometimes reluctant to accept that cannabis is causing their symptoms, said Dr. Chris Baresh, an emergency medical specialist with the University of Washington Medal in Seattle's Children's. Cannabis is widely used to reduce nausea for chemotherapy patients or those managing HIV or migraines, which makes the connection more difficult for some to understand. Some people say they've used cannabis without a problem for decades, or they smoke pot because they think it treats their nausea, he said. It seems like there's a threshold when people can become vulnerable to this condition, and that thresholds are different for everyone. Even using in small amounts can make these people start throwing up. What causes the condition to affect some individuals but not others remains unclear. We don't know if it's related to the greater general availability of cannabis or the higher THC potency of some products or something else, Baresh said. The syndrome is also challenging to treat. Standard anti-nausea medications often do not work well, he said, leading physicians to try second or third line options such as Haldol, which is usually prescribed for psychotic episodes. Some patients find temporary relief from capsaicin cream, an over-the-counter product that creates a warming sensation. Others report that hot showers ease their discomfort. There's something that can clinch the diagnosis for me when somebody says they're better with a hot shower. Patients describe going through all the hot water in their house, he said. Several factors can slow a patient's recovery because the syndrome appears intermittently. Some cannabis users may believe a recent episode was unrelated and continue using cannabis without problems until they suddenly become very sick again. For those who accept the diagnosis and try to stop using cannabis to improve their symptoms, addiction can make that process challenging, Carlini said. So, that is an interesting rundown of the article. I've also had a chance to read some papers that I've come across since reading that, and one paper very clearly suggested and was even able to identify comorbidities that would exist, and actually had narrowed it down to 5 very specific comorbidities within the body. And it definitely seems like things that are involved within the pathways of the endocannabinoid system, which is interesting. It's a widely unknown system. We only understand certain parts of it because historically it's been very difficult to examine and to research the endocannabinoid system, especially with its relationship to phytocannabinoids, plant-based cannabinoids. On top of that, the endocannabinoid system was just discovered in the first half of the 90s. I mean, it's all within, at least the people sitting here, all of our lifetimes. So, of course, people don't know that much about it. And as a result, it's not generally taught in medical school. I understand that things like the hormone system can take months and months and months to be able to teach a person, yet the endocannabinoid system is oftentimes the book is open and closed within the same one day. And so if that is true still in current form, that would show a lot of the root of misunderstanding. Now, this cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome is a really interesting thing. Further research beyond something that it seems to be related to in terms of comorbidities is that it does seem to be a real thing. There's a prominent person within the cannabis industry named Alice Moon, who also suffers from this. She's well known. She doesn't hold back. She says that this is a real thing, and I would absolutely go behind what she says. That much said, it's still something that needs to be researched. I have influenced countless people's smoking habits and personally have smoked with lots of people who would find themselves to be, in a very purist sense, connoisseurs. And I don't mean connoisseurs in a general sense of what they think of themselves. I'm giving them that title. They intend to be purists. They spend way too much on cannabis, or way too much effort on determining what is a high quality cannabis product, oftentimes single source, very purely derived, and what they put into their body is very important to them. Again, I've influenced countless people smoking, countless people have influenced mine. And this is something that I've been around with large points of these groups that I've grown up with. Although I know and respect Alice Moon, she unfortunately isn't somebody who I've ever had a chance to really, burn one with for the last 20, 25 years, like so many others that fall into this group. And those people, this would be completely unheard of. And I don't mean to decry the concerns that surround it. It absolutely is a real thing, should be understood, and should be studied. The fact that it can come up randomly, I really want to examine what types of products that have been consumed by these people. From reading into it, very prominently, people who have been stricken with this have also been smoking Delta 8, and have also been smoking lab-derived cannabinoids, lab-synthesized cannabinoids, not plant-synthesized cannabinoids. And those seem to be two of the leading groups that seem to have attention in this kind of thing. And I've seen this before. Way back in another lifetime, I worked for a smoke shop. And at that time, that spice product, K2, remember that, awful disaster? So that dumpster fire was out, and
trust
people
me,
were
we
consuming
remember that
it.
awful disaster in Texas.
I worked not that far from a Marine base, and it was a common thing where people would come in. And after a while, you would actually start to see the impact it had on them. And based on the studies that were going on back then, we found out it was wreaking havoc on the endocannabinoid system. And this, again, seems like a version of an endocannabinoid system deficiency, and something that's breaking more so, and then just watch out, guys. If you smoke too much cannabis or too little, this is going to happen. There are so many conditions in here that seem to be stressing a potentially weak endocannabinoid system, and the fact that it exists or could potentially put it over the edge is something that needs to be noticed. However, what I don't see in this article is mention of comorbidities, which is an absolutely important thing to review here. And another thing that I would say that seems to be present is that the impact of what types of products and how they may be interpreted by our endocannabinoid systems needs to be deeply reviewed. Until then, it seems to be something that's out there, but not something that, if you are, say, the person who absolutely has the most ethically derived cannabis in the world, not necessarily something that kind of hits you. I haven't necessarily seen it except for limited degrees, like I explained. I'd be really curious if you guys have seen any mention of it. Sorry to go on along so long, guys. It's fairly new to me. I've had a bit of research and wanted to share everything that I knew about it with you. So there it is. Thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Jason, if you're listening. Thank you, audience. You guys are awesome.
Nate, thank you. I think it introduces a lot of conversation. And, I love that you brought up spice and the spectrum of the cannabinoid system, and Alice Moon, because while you were reading, I was thinking of Alice Moon. Exactly. And so I had a conversation with Riley Kirk last year at MJ Biz. Some of y'all might know her as Cannabichem. She's a cannabis scientist who really knows her shit. And we had talked about the fact that a study had come out showing that veterans who had PTSD showed more receptors developing and opening, needing cannabinoids. So more CB2 and CB1 receptors after a post-traumatic event. And so interesting to me, because they would explain why my tolerance level is so high, because I have more receptors probably that need those cannabinoids that my body likely because I have an autoimmune condition. And other, I love that you mentioned comorbidities because I really want to lean into this. This is like a little nerdy science project I want to dive into this spring because this is a real thing, and it's really your body telling you to slow the fuck down and not burn your system out. And I do appreciate that you brought up how the cannabinoids, once we have removed them from their natural molecule and we've done something to them, processed them in some way, making it delta 8, even if it works for you, we still have to understand, just like food processing, that is going to affect your body. And we don't fully understand how just the natural molecules are interacting with our own neurological and endocannabinoid system. We're barely figuring out what's going on in the brain. So I don't know how far off we are from cannabis research really taking off, although there was a report that 4,000 studies were done in the past year alone. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of all of those. But this is a real conversation we need to have. Liz, I saw
Yeah,
you.
man. Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. I felt like it was a very it was a fair representation, fair story all around. One way that I'm acutely aware of this syndrome is because the paid actors, as far as I'm concerned, for the other side, for the anti-hemp side, during the entire legislation, used this potential diagnoses. Now it's a diagnosis. And now what we're going to have to come in armed to the Capitol to, fight against that. It's not everybody. It's a very small amount of people who are affected by this plan. And that's true. I believe that very much. I know Alice Moon. She is just so lovely and such a great spokesperson for, this syndrome. And we have to be aware that, we have an endocannabinoid system, and certain things in life, certain traumas will make our endocannabinoid system act differently, or certain, other diagnoses. And I'm really glad you mentioned comorbidity, because nobody does. It just doesn't make for a sexy story. But that's a fact. We need to learn more about this so that we can educate. Cannabis isn't for everyone. It's just not. And it's okay. But we need to know for whom it's not and why. And, that's all I have to say about it. But
The
yeah,
guy
great
who
story.
coined the entourage effect, Dr. Ethan Russo, was
Yeah.
involved in one of the papers that I read that was published from earlier this year that
He's amazing.
specifically covered comorbidities and specifically covered direct pathways that seem to be compromised that allow for this to unfortunately happen. So, as unfortunately random as it seems, it goes way more specific to that, and it's way more selective, and it's way more beyond our poor human brains at this time. And it's interesting to know about, but obviously to take something that even people who take the time to research it and have certain levels of uncertainty, or what may again, I think the products need to be what's examined here. And even though I read surveys, and granted, it was the most accessible one was the survey that was attached to this article, and go figure, that survey didn't cover products. However, I can tell you the one person besides Alice, a family member who I know who have had something where I'm like, this sounds like what Uncle Alex told me he ran into a couple of months ago. So Uncle Alex had some synthetic cannabinoid gummies.
Yeah.
And
but back to you. Yes. And
there you go.
The synthetic. Exactly. There you go. It's Uncle Alex, or it's my 20-year-old son. That's the talk track that they use, the anti-hemp moms use. And it's okay. Yes. And again, your heart goes out to anyone who's suffering, period. But we need to figure it out, and we cannot point a finger at the plant, or else we should have been pointing fingers at alcohol, tobacco, cars, guns, some dogs. It's like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I do think, and we're gonna skip our last commercial break so we can cover our last two stories, but I do think it's funny that the alcohol industry is really going hard on the scromiting And it's like, well, alcohol is mad that alcohol is saying cannabis makes you puke. Alcohol saying cannabis makes you puke. I was like, what the hell is going on, guys? What kind of Twilight Zone is this?
You
Like,
said the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, I like to just think about when I had alcohol poisoning at 16, and I'm like already like do not alcohol go there.
yeah, so
You
I just
know,
think it's funny that they're pushing that right now. But let's dive into our next story. We're going to go back to the East Coast, and Liz is actually going to cover this
hey,
story. We're going to
guys,
Massachusetts. And
going to
Liz, tell us
Massachusetts.
what's going on in Massachusetts.
So what's going on in Massachusetts? Sean and I, 19, thanks again for having me back on. A little bit rowdy this morning. Totally appreciate it. Nate, you're handling the Texans with grace. But I'm here to talk about Massachusetts. I've spent some time in Massachusetts. I was blessed to go to the Super Organic Cultivators Conference in 2022, excuse me, with a bunch of folks from the West Coast who are, all about living soil and all about soil science. And what they're doing in Massachusetts and Maine, I'm just like, oh my God, yes, I tip my hat to you. And so now I'm excited. This comes from CBS News, Louisa Mahler. Massachusetts regulators are expected to pass social consumption of cannabis on Thursday. So today we're expected to pass social consumption. So what does that mean? Okay, what does that mean? They're poised to allow cannabis use at dispensaries, lounges, and other venues like yoga studios. Okay, they specifically called out yoga studios, which I think is hilarious. But they're just local businesses are going to decide where and when it's appropriate for cannabis consumption. And that's the long and the short of it. It's really, really exciting. Massachusetts has had a program for the last 7 years. And only, just now have they said, yeah, let's give it a try. So here's how it's going to go. It's a pilot program. So initially the state is going to issue 12 licenses for cannabis cafes. Okay. And this is part of a phased rollout. I don't know when the yoga studios are coming, so don't ask. But it's, they're going to evaluate the program at each phase. Obviously, that's how you roll out a program. Indoor and outdoor use is involved. There's no proposed laws for that yet. And social equity applicants are going to get the first chance to operate these venues, reinforcing the state's commitment to restorative justice slush funds. Public health considerations, there will be strict ventilation requirements, so expect a lot of money. Regulations, this is Massachusetts here, Taxachusetts, as they say. And educational materials must be available on site to inform consumers about responsible use. So great. Lots of costs for the business owner here. So here's the opposition concerns. Local officials and health advocates, of course, are cautious and they don't want to turn it into like a bar culture type of a thing. I mean, this is Massachusetts we're talking about. How much beer is consumed in Massachusetts on a yearly basis. I love Massachusetts. I think it's an incredible state. And, I feel the pain of the people when I talk about taxation. I would never, ever be in a negative way to the people. It's just, government's taking too much. So that's where we are, though. Massachusetts is going to have some lounges, and I, for one, am really excited. I will be the first in line. I will spend the dollars. I will be the consumer, and I'm, excited for what's to come in Massachusetts, and proud of those pioneers who are going first and who are saying, "I'm doing it." Quick shout out: if you want a textbook way to give a cannabis consumption lounge to the community, go to Cirrus in Denver. I don't know if you've been to Cirrus Social Consumption Lounge. If any of you guys have been, if any of you on the chat have been, just shout it out. It's an incredible experience, and it's like not just lighting up in a bar. That's really all I can say. It's like just an experience of cannabis and food and friends and mocktails and cocktails, if you like. But I feel like Boston is going to do it right. So that's my story. Guys, what do you think about toking it up in public in Massachusetts?
I think California, or not California, New York is one of the more inclusive models that's existed out there in terms of their approach to public consumption. If it's cool for cigarettes, then it's cool for weed. I, for one, have found a lot of peace with that when visiting the city, and I don't know if it's in the spirit of what's allowed, but I light up at every moment where I'm walking, and that's an awful lot. So pretty much
Yeah.
nothing is off limits. Well, I mean, I'm not running through playgrounds or anything like that, but the notion of what these guys have to do to like sort of capitalize on and say, okay, well, here's this free for all kind of approach, which seems to kind of work. But what is the opportunity now that is being created here by Mass and by Boston? And it seems like they might want to build off of that. I'm kind of curious and really eager to hear what the outdoor consumption is, because indoor consumption, it sounds like they have it right. I mean, that's great. If
Yeah.
it's okay to have something that could be noisy or smoky, then it's
Yeah.
okay for it to be noisy and smoky with this thing too. That probably stands as a general model. I wonder what they're going to do with outside, though, if it's going to be restrictive to only private property or if public comes
Yeah.
out. Because one more thing I have to say about this is I love the idea of cannabis tourism. And I really agree with the idea of any area which has its own unique terroir that it may support and way of doing things or climates or whatever. I want to, whenever I visit an area, when it's permissible and available, I want to see what that area produces. I want to learn more about that area through my connection and understanding with cannabis. And I know I'm not alone there. When you visit an area and they've got something worth trying, we're going to try it, right? So anyhow, moving along, I'm really curious to see how you have the opportunity to really share this when you get to cannabis tourism. But the problem with cannabis tourism, and there's a lot of exceptions to this, but for the most part in the country, you visit someplace, and if there's not an abundance of cannabis lounges or bed and breakfast type setups, or if it's not generally accepted that you can just buy it and literally turn around and smoke it on the street, which is an exception. Not many places have something like that. Then generally the cannabis tourism approach is like, come to sunny San Diego, visit our many dispensaries, buy some, fuck you for whatever you want to smoke. Like, you're not going to get that. Colorado, same thing. Come here, buy cannabis. I've heard that message so many times. Where do I smoke it now? Oh, no, you gave us money already. F yourself. There's no place to smoke it. There's no community where you can join and meet with the other smokers and absorb the community and do the thing that you can do with virtually any other thing you're into, you can't do with cannabis. And it's heartbreaking. And that's my gripe with cannabis tourism. And I'm hoping that as we see a new opportunity to approach this, and especially one that, based on the article, seems sensible, I'm hoping that they recognize this, that there's actually an opportunity to create a cannabis tourism industry rather than come here, buy our bud, and then go F yourself because I don't care where you smoke it. Well, I care, and I want to smoke it someplace meaningful that comes with an experience. And so show me where that is.
That breaks my heart because it reminds me of how spoiled we are in Texas. When I went to Denver, I was expecting to have this like woo-la experience, right? Because I was leaving my Texas hemp market. And I want to make it clear, you're not talking about cannabis tourism. Totally, you're talking about marijuana tourism as a sector. And we have hemp, and they're both cannabis. So cannabis tourism overall, we do have some spots, and we're just so lucky. Like, we have a place like Cozy where literally the whole business plan is around building community,
Sativa sessions this Saturday night, you guys. Cozy Cannabis, 4th Street, Austin. Come and light up. Let's reel. Sorry.
That's funny. We love Brandy. But we have to also, to your point, I think those cities like Boston would be really smart to adopt policies like other major cities like New York, like Austin. I don't know about what they did out in California. It was a little, every time I worked with a California partner, I was always so shocked, especially around the Beverly Hills area a few years ago. It was so hard to get anything done because there was always so many local complaints about literally everything. And we don't
North,
have as much.
the short
Yeah,
version
That's
is north of the
California.
bay. North of the bay, it's fine. Cannabis tourism north of the bay is alive and healthy. Cannabis tourism anywhere else in the state is, thank you for the money. Now go F yourself. There's little microcosms. Long Beach, because it's most streets in Long Beach are fairly safe to walk down, and people don't really care what you're doing. There are exceptions in Long Beach and LA, in maybe Laguna Beach, where you can walk down the street and smoke weed. Nobody will say anything. But I mean, you have to know the area, and nobody's advertising, yeah, come to fucking Broadway on Long Beach and then smoke your joint while you sample the local wares. Like that's that's a marketing message by no
So
one.
cool.
So
Yeah,
you
it's a shame.
can
It's
if
just too
you
much
know it, but
regulation.
it's local, and that's how it may exist in this country until there's actually developed cannabis like tourism, or as you call marijuana, or overall this one plant we all love and give our life to, that thing's version of tourism. Because it sounds like you have a
You,
great idea of how it should be based on a good example, and
We
I speak for everybody else where I say, why don't we have that?
I think
you got to
Austin's
get your politicians out. You got to get your politicians out. You can
I
do it,
think
California. You can take it back. I'm telling
I'm
you.
not gonna lecture Cali on dealing with their
We
legislators.
love
They're
them.
a whole
We love
other mess.
them.
But we are going to send a lot of love. Stone, do you have final thoughts on this story before we go on the last one? Stone's ready to burn one. Let's go. So Stone, I have one that I think is going to make you laugh. Last story of the day. Also in Massachusetts, a lot of weird things going on in Massachusetts. We have that initiative, I think, the voter ballot initiative to try to repeal cannabis entirely. Then you have that they're actually, no, we're also regulating social consumption. Here's another twister for you. Law enforcement groups, this is from CBS News, law enforcement group alleges fraud in Massachusetts cannabis industry. They're ripping off the consumer. They're saying those THC numbers aren't what you're saying they are. I just think it's funny that it's coming from the cops. The president of a local, that's not 60% THC. This is a mid. Now, the president of a local law enforcement group is sounding alarms about the reliability of cannabis products in Massachusetts. Matt Gutwill, the president of New England Narcotics Officers Enforcement Association, argues that THC percentages in cannabis products are being inflated. What they're doing is ripping off the consumer, Gutwill said. THC percentages below what is on the label. Gutwill and his organization say they have tested more than 100 products from multiple dispensaries over the past 2 years and found that a significant number had THC percentages below what was stated on the product's labels. The testing is saying it's 12.8% and 0.1% CBD, but when we purchased this, the label that said that it was 34.65% THC. No, it was actually 12.8, said Gutwill, showing how he tested a joint using a NIR lab screening device. This little device looks real interesting. I feel like DPS would be interested in that. I'm going to look it up. Gutwill argues that THC inflation is a symptom of larger problem, a lack of oversight by state regulators of cannabis testing labs. Massachusetts regulations require cannabis products to be tested by licensed labs before they can be sold at dispensaries. Rumors of lab shopping or trying out different labs to get the most favorable result have swirled in the industry. Gutwill says it's possible because the Cannabis Control Commission, the state's regulatory body which oversees cannabis commercialization, did not conduct its own random testing. The state is not doing its own audits. Say it isn't so. They are not doing anything on the enforcement end, Gutwill said. Yeast and mold found in cannabis samples, not just what's fallen off the back of the truck, what's actually in your stores. Over the summer, CCC took its most significant enforcement action to date, suspending assured testing labs in Tingsboro for failing to report samples of cannabis that show the presence of yeast and mold. I really cannot wait to hear what Nate has to say on this story. He used to run a lab. The CCC found that Assured failed to report the presence of yeast and mold in more than 7,000 samples. That's a lot. In more than 500 lab samples, the CCC alleged that Assured failed to report the presence of yeast and mold that exceeded the state's legal threshold for sale. Noncompliance poses an immediate and serious threat to public health, safety, or welfare of the Commonwealth, the suspension notice stated. Assured, however, sued the CCC, arguing that the company did not receive due process. The lab opened a month and a half later after paying a $300,000 fine. They have not been accused by the CCC of inflating THC levels. Dr. Zoe Weiss, the clinical director of microbiology at Tufts Medical Center, told WBZ the presence of mold can cause severe issues for anyone who is immunocompromised. It can enter the lungs and cause pneumonias that can lead to even areas like a ball of fungus in the lungs that can invade blood vessels in the lungs. She said lungs a lot. WBZ sat down with the chair of the Cannabis Control Commission, Shannon O'Brien, and the body's of Public Safety, Commissioner Kimberly Roy, to discuss the state of cannabis testing. Roy told WBZ TV that the CCC prevented the products tested by Assured from being distributed further, but did not recall products that were already on dispensary shelves. We don't have that luxury of a federal agency guiding us. Every state is on its own. Ugh, I don't like that. What are you asking for? This is the mistake some states make. You want federal enforcement in your state? That's a bad idea. That just spoken like a Texan. No, you don't. And we're seeing that in real time across the United States. So he says we don't have the luxury of a federal agency guiding us. Every state is on their own. And so is there more to do? Yes, but those products, once identified, they were frozen in place and consumers and patients couldn't purchase them. Roy and O'Brien did not refute that THC inflation could be happening in the industry. What you're referring to is more consumer and patient fraud. So you pay more for a higher potency THC. So folks, patients, and consumers are paying additional. Roy said she is championing the creation of an independent state-run laboratory to check testing accuracy. She said budgetary restraints prevent the state from creating one right now, and that she's also created a task force and is working to create a tip line. Okay, on the tip line, I'm not so sure. Other ideas I like, but tip lines, I don't know about. If you have a complaint, you have the COA, then bring it up. You don't need a tip line for that. You can actually take some real action. Roy O'Brien also said that they will work to enact a regular secret shopping program. This is a good idea. Look, listen, the states need to have these. I'm going to cut the story short. I think it's hilarious that law enforcement is pointing out that the industry is inflating THC numbers and calling it consumer fraud. It 100% is consumer fraud. I just think it's really funny that it's the cops being like, that isn't a 30% joint. That is a 12.8% joint. So it cracks me up. However, there are some real serious issues here. Look, hemp is on the national stage. Cannabis is on the national stage. Marijuana, they have been messing with y'all for so long. They already got you in the box. You know what I'm saying? They are already messing with y'all. Reschedule they're just dangling bait in front of your face and making you think that it's good for you. It's not. There's a hook. So we know that this is all on a national stage, and we can bring it back to the group. Understanding that we're on a national stage, Nate, especially you, what are cannabis industry operators really going to need to do as they look toward the future? And what should they have already been doing as it relates to due diligence and properly labeling their product?
Wow. Yeah, that's a mouthful. One thing you asked is NIR testing, that fits into that as an easy one. So let's go for the low-hanging fruit first. NIR testing, near infrared, is what that stands for. So NIR is the equivalent of a handheld module that shoots a laser through a bud versus a process of chemical extraction that utilizes multiple aspects of how a product chemically behaves through multiple stages and through countless means of being able to have run this by a method, and a method that can be double checked and more thoroughly is that, and tested over and over again if needed. NIR doesn't hold anything to that. So on one hand, to know that NIR, near infrared, to revealed a different answer than something tested by, say, a liquid chromatography instrument, which is what's typical in the industry, doesn't surprise me in the least. And when it comes down to certain chemicals that are within the spectrum of cannabis, NIR is only going to be more perceptive to certain ones versus others. So depending on what kind of product it is, it could be anything. So that's unfortunately a poor part of the argument. Everything else is obviously fantastic. The 34% notion and something being around there for the next piece of low-hanging fruit, that's high. And when you're a laboratory and you're doing your damnedest and everything you can, you're held to certain standards in certain international standards. The International Standards Organization, or ISO, is a set of accreditations that are offered to laboratories of various pieces. When they accredit you, they accredit certain processes that you've developed, certain methods you've developed, and you stick to those methods. An unfortunate thing is that a scientific method is also very caging. And in that sense, I have run into samples that tested, say, over 34%. And you look at it as just a logical person and you're like, no effing way. And then the next thing you do is you test it, and you test it again. And by gar, you use that same method as much as you can while sticking to the method that's been approved in our previous cases by the state, by your ISO accreditor. You're not allowed to leave that. And if you're not allowed to prove that something is lower than that, then you'll publish the best thing that you can say is a rational answer. But sometimes you're limited by your methods and saying I can't prove that it's any lower than this. Now, when you approach a lab and that lab is well to do and they've even ever bothered to release something that's that high, the very first answer they should give you is something that sounds like what I just said. Like, I'm sorry, we have an approved method. We're not allowed to go outside of it. And we tried 10 times over to show that it was lower than this number. And our approved method and utilizing the extractions and dilutions and every last step and having every last person look at it, we were unable to prove that it was lower than this. The lab can't make up a lower number. We literally have to go with the lowest thing we can prove. And I do agree that I've seen some numbers essentially break that logic and be higher than I would ever think that cannabis could be. Now, that much said, again, a lab should have very much a pre-prescribed answer. I'm so sorry if you don't believe that, but literally the state told us that this is the only thing we could use, or our ISO accreditor told us this is the only thing that we're allowed to tell you, and here's our raw data, and here us showing this. I would happily do this as a laboratory, and this is something that people should be able to prove. And the fact that, and we all know what's going on, they don't approve it, and the fact that it's an imaginary big D contest where you're just paying somebody for a piece of paper to say that yours is the longest, which I'm not impressed, but some people feel like that's the kind of rule they have to play by. It's sad. It really is. And to see this called out is a pretty significant thing. It really does expose, and this is why I say it's kind of great. It does expose the weird level of marketing that bastardizes science in our industry rather than how science should actually be used. How science is seen is something that makes or breaks a product, whether or not it passes contamination, whether or not it's high versus low THC. Those shouldn't be things. We should all generally agree that nobody should be having contaminated product. 7,000 tests is absolutely mind-blowing. That basically means at a certain point they just hit no F's given mode and just passed everything. That's basically what that means right there. So that's just crazy to me. that you could just hit a no F's given, like, everybody's failing. It's cool. Like that, like instead of sounding an alarm, like that blows my mind. And that is profiteer to the max. And we need to be pointing out that kind of behavior because that's absolutely horrible. And if there are certain contaminants that should or shouldn't be tested for, I mean, general yeast and mold, as per your article, is very, very general. And it's just an overall indication of the conditions in which that was grown and stored in. But it doesn't tell you that much about what's on it. That doesn't tell you something like E. coli or salmonella or something that could seriously kill you is on this thing. It just tells you it's a little funky, which, depending on somebody's definition, may or may not be something that should exist. For instance, there are a crap ton of various states, California included, which don't even bother looking at yeast and mold because they would say something similar. Everything would fail if it was yeast and mold. But then again, we have things like being able to establish limits, retests. Certain things could even be said to be made exclusive because of the cost of them. But we should talk about these things rather than just pass them flippantly, or understand that this is something that is or isn't to be included. Like, making up our own rules is kind of how we got in a lot of these messes. And so that's something that needs to be considered when we look at how self-regulation ultimately looks. I believe it can work, but when you look at how people, even under regulated guidelines, find ways to be able to create their own loopholes. And at this point, I can tell you the vast majority of testing labs in the United States would rather tell you that your D is way longer than it is, because they know that they'll keep giving you money. And all you have to do is basically print out COAs, certificates of analysis. And the whole while, people will just keep giving you money because they'll tell you what you want to hear. Now, is that the industry that we want? I ask you guys.
No, because it harms innovation. Because when we don't know what the consumers actually are responding to, then what are we doing? They're spending all of this time inflating. And I think this was something that we learned using the other cannabinoids in other spaces where THC originally was more limited, until we all kind of thought about that THCA thing. But I'm really looking forward to, earlier we talked about getting to regionalities and getting to a space where there's actually a level of discernible quality. Not that there's not a level of discernible quality, but more consistently, and in multiple regions.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I
You know what happened to Bubba Kush, Sean? You know what happened to Bubba Kush, guys? It's 12% on a good day. I've seen it as low as 9%. That's what happened to Bubba Kush. Not that it's not fantastic, not that it shouldn't be smoked, not that it shouldn't be everywhere. It's not marketable because everybody is confused that this notion that you're supposed to create the singularity of quality in cannabis around a number, which is absolutely BS. And everybody knows it to be true. How about this, guys? The best quality candy out there isn't the highest sugar content. The best quality coffee isn't the highest caffeine, and the best quality liquor isn't the highest alcohol content. Yeah, right. Everybody knows that.
would be
Like, can I get it one further? Like, the best quality cannabis is not high in THC. It's actually the opposite. You know what people tend to enjoy is a better balance. I've actually run focus groups on this. The more flavor, the higher terpene content, and the lower the THC, which means balance. People blind studies go for that because they think that weed looks better and they think that weed smokes better. You know what they call cannabis with high THC in a blind study? They all used one word. It's harsh. And that's exactly what you would use if I fed you Everclear without you knowing. Is if it's high in THC and low in everything else, it tastes harsh. And so why we absolutely celebrate this is mind-boggling when I've seen time and time again, and scientific-based evidence after scientific-based evidence, and every rational person talking about every rational piece of the product in the world doesn't, the best steak isn't the highest in fat. I mean, I could keep going here. You know what I mean? Like, why people just take this arbitrary number and say it means quality is absolutely mind-blowing, and there's absolutely not rooted in fact. And I could go on and on.
Well, we started with an arbitrary number with that 5 milligram cap on hemp products as announced as an alternative to an all-out ban. I do want to say that is more progress than we had before. At least we got a bill on the table that has something, but let's keep pushing as we did in the Lone Star State. We know we can get this all the way over the hurdle. Stone, Liz, y'all got final thoughts? Ready to... Let's get out of here. Thank you all for getting high at 9 with us and staying a little extra with our delayed broadcast on YouTube every Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. PSTN, high noon on the East Coast. Big shout out to our audience and supporters for tuning in daily and listening to the insanity that is the developing cannabis industry. Huge thank you to Catalyst. Shout out to Elliot. Big news tomorrow. If you love the old school days with Nicole West, join us tomorrow. We're going to have the doctors on and Nicole, so you can get a full write-up and a prescription for how to do everything right in cannabis. You know she's going to tell you like it is. And she got exclusive interview content and quotes straight from Elliot on the case that they won against the DCC. We're going to be covering that tomorrow on Friday. So we're going to talk about our health and wellness and the DCC. I got to balance it out. I'm going to raise your blood pressure and then we're going to bring you down with the doctors. So big shout out to our audience and supporters. Thank you to Cannabis Sativa L for giving us a reason to do this every day. And thank you to our cloud media partners, Elias and Gabriel out there in the metaverse. Thank you all for tuning in and getting high with us at 9. We are America's #1 daily cannabis news show.